I'd just had a great day. The weather had been really kind on the coast at Scramiston, and I'd been having fun exploring and photographing some stunning buckled and folded rocks. Now I was driving back home. Sitting stationary in the usual Western bypass traffic jam, my mind turned to a regular theme. How come only me, and a steadily diminishing band of geologists, find rocks like these and the stories they have to tell really fascinating? In the words of a non-geologist, aka normal person, friend Scotch Dave, it's only a bloody stain, Ian. It always depresses me, especially when he seems to get so excited over how well he can hit a small white dimpled ball, and a lot less excited when I try to tell him how volcanoes have erupted and earthquakes buckled the Northumberland landscape in the past. But I remembered my promise on retirement not to be a grumpy old geologist. My wife says I've broken it every day since. So I switched off that negative line of thought and switched on the radio. Someone called Neil McGregor, director of the British Museum apparently, and with an accent not at all like Scotch Dave, was distilling the history of the world through 100 objects.
To see how we humans over 2 million years have shaped our world and been shaped by it. And I'm going to tell this story exclusively through the things that humans have made.
Interesting concept, I thought. If Mr. McGregor can do world history in 100 esoteric and arty objects and get prime time on Radio 4, couldn't I do the history of Northumberland in 10 far more amazing natural stones and star on Radio Newcastle? And even better, because it's natural stones, we wouldn't be limited to the tiny overblown chapter about humankind on this planet. We could embrace the full history of the Earth. Well, the Northumberland bit of the Earth anyway. So here goes. Starting with the oldest and getting progressively younger, this is what 10 stones, rocks, crags, lumps and bumps, and being inclusive here, have to say about the history of the old county of Northumberland. The plan is to take you to 10 places and in less than 3 minutes a stone, tell you what those places have witnessed over millions of years. Get your TARDIS ready. You're about to become time travellers. Stone number 1, ocean depths. We're heading up to the mountains of the wild northwest and almost to the Scottish border to find the oldest rocks in the county. They're from a period in Earth's history named after a Welsh tribe. They're Silurian. It might seem a long way, but we get to take a beautiful drive up a single-track valley road to the head of the River Coquet. There's another bit of these old stones over the hill at Carter Bar, but the verge of the A68 is not the best place to go poking around looking at rocks. It has to be said it's not the best day to go and see the oldest stones. The wind is howling and the rain is battering down on the car. Just beside a bridge near a farm called Mackinnon is a little scar in the riverbank, and in the scar are ancient ocean sediments, our oldest rocks. Admittedly, they don't appear like the stuff of a seabed anymore. Lying around are shattered and broken bits of grey rock. Rock that does look as if it has suffered the stresses and fractures of every one of its 425 million years of existence. But these broken bits of grainy grey stone were once a mixed up mass of sand and mud at the bottom of a very deep ocean. Why mixed up? That's not normal. Nature and geology likes order. Sorted, quite literally. It's a question that's puzzled geologists for a long time, but now we think we know. These turbidites, that's what we call them, are the result of huge catastrophic slides of sediment lying at the edge slopes of continental shelves. They move down so quickly that they haven't got time to get sorted. And before you say, what's all this got to do with the price of fruit? It's maybe worth remembering that huge catastrophic slides like this still happen. And so when you read, as you did the other week, about a chunk of West Africa's internet going down, it's because one of these underwater landslides has just taken out the cables we've laid to connect the world and its web. And yes, especially because we're an island, it could happen to us. And on that happy marine note, I'll end. We're at the real seaside next time to see stone number 2 and a tale of colliding continents. After a nudge from the British Museum, I decided to describe the history of Northumberland in 10 stones. But not just a little bit of history with humans in it, all of it, from 425 million years ago until now. Stone number 2, where continents collide. Welcome to Cullercoats, Tynemouth North Point to be precise, a place where, believe it or not, enormous forces broke the Earth's crust and left 2 bits of rock that are millions of years different in age lying next to each other. It's a geological fault, and it's as plain as the nose on your face. Not always the case with things geological. Coal miners called this dislocation the 90-fathom dike. But let's get it right. It's not a dike, it's a fault. Let's stand on the foreshore and look back at the little cliff. On your left, that's south, there are grey shales. To your right is a yellow sandstone. What you're seeing here is a 320 million year old carboniferous set of rocks, the grey shales, lying inappropriately with a much younger bedfellow, the 275 million year old Permian yellow sandstone. You'll have heard of tectonic plates. Journalists have long borrowed and misused the term for political squabbles. Well, it's time to reclaim tectonic plates and use it properly, for rocks. 420 million years ago, 2 ancient continents, the tectonic plates, collided hereabouts, along a line called the Iapetus Suture Zone. What's this got to do with this fault? Well, the join in these tectonic plates has been a weak point in the Earth's crust ever since, and the fault you're looking at is just one bit of evidence of that. The other bit of evidence is some seriously deep geophysics, kilometres deep, not the superficial stuff of Tony Robinson and the Time team. So when you're next having a drink with your mates, listening to the golf addict drone on about his double birdie and the cyclist his carbon fibre bike, wait for them to pause for breath, then casually mention that in Cullercoats the other day you stood on a spot where 2 continents collided. I can guarantee they won't look at you the same again. Stone 3, Cheviot Hot Rocks. We're back in the Cheviot Mountains and in the beautiful Hartope Valley. And this time it's a lovely day. Fancy a relatively short climb up Housie Crags? Go on, if you've got kids they'll love you for it, honest. It's a spectacular rock castle, a tor that sticks upon the hillside. It's one bit of a collection of volcanoes that erupted about 400 million years ago and whose lava covered most of northern Northumberland. This landscape must have looked a lot different then. No grouse or sheep then either. Think more a warmer version of Iceland. Say Hawaii. Lots of volcanic vents, pumping out molten rock, and some explosive episodes too. Shortly after they erupted, these lavas suffered a reheat. Not so much a twice-baked souffle, more like yesterday's takeaway leftovers that you forgot about in the oven. Deep underground, a huge chamber of molten rock that was to become the Cheviot granite was cooking all of the rocks around it. It was so hot that it recrystallized many of the lavas into a metamorphic rock. If you want to impress, or depress, your friends, they went from being andesites to being hornfells. You're right, probably best kept to yourself. Millions and millions of years of erosion, which wore down the granite of Cheviot 2, has left these bits of lava poking out of the ground. If you've ever been to Devon, it's like a Dartmoor tor, but a bit more battered, because unlike Dartmoor, it was eroded by an ice sheet during the last glaciation. Hold on to that thought, because we'll be doing some cool stuff on ice ages in Stone 9. From the top of the crag, there are great views of the granite domes of the Cheviot and Hedgehope, number 1 and number 6 in the highest mountains of Northumberland. Your choice now. Race the kids up Hedgehope, or maybe walk gently back to the car in the Hartope Valley below. Stone 4. Brahmaputra, not coconut. The sound is a giveaway. Grouse. We could be in the North Pennines, but we're just a couple of miles south of Rothbury in the Simonside Hills, one of the distinctive landmarks on the Northumberland skyline, whether you view them from the south or the north. It's a sandstone upland, a heather and bog moorland that's dotted with archaeological remains. Sacred Mountain or not, Simonside and the other gritstone eminences were very significant features in the prehistoric and historic landscape. People then knew a good bit of rock when they saw one. Places to carve patterns into and bury your dead on. Whoa, almost got diverted into archaeology there. Not that there's anything wrong with the archaeologists, provided they remember not to stray too far from the surface. The rock that Simonside is made of is called the fell sandstone. The ridges it makes, because of its hardness, form a great arc across the middle and north Northumberland. The origins of this sandstone go back 345 million years, a period in the Carboniferous when this whole area was an enormous floodplain, crisscrossed by braided rivers, bringing down sand and pebbles from a mountain chain much further north. Look at those stacked bands and layers of rock, some horizontal and some slanting. What do they tell us? Well, they speak of a time when these rocks were sediments in riverbeds and underwater dunes in a fast-flowing torrent. This was a big river, many miles wide. Coquet it is not. Brahmaputra it was. Having praised our ancestors for recognising the qualities of a useful rock when they saw one, I best give credit to us modern folk. The fell sandstones are put to good use to us today as an important aquifer, a natural underground rock reservoir for drinking water. And so it's critical we must protect it from pollution, from our waste and our pesticides. That's a neat segue into Stone 5, a story about crystal clear coral seas. Stone 5. Clear coral seas in a northern forest. It's quiet here. We're a long way from anywhere. Leastways a long way from any road you'd be wise to take a family car along. We're tucked away in a clearing in the middle of a Sitka spruce forest, somewhere between Bellingham and Holtwhistle. We are in what's left of an old limestone quarry, one that was used for making forest roads, I guess. If I tell you any more about where it is, I'd have to shoot you, or Forestry England would shoot me, so I'll keep it as vague as that. Or you could always get your geological map out and search for the Four Laws limestone. Now there's a worthwhile challenge. It's a very wonderful limestone quarry, because lying around in the rock are thousands of fossils of large seashells. A giant brachiopod called Gigantoproductus. The name gave it away, didn't it? The fossil shells reach 15 centimeters across. Some are ribbed and some look like they had a series of spiny horns on them. When they were alive, they held onto the seabed with what looked like a stalk, hence the name brachiopod, arm foot. Believe it or not, brachiopods have lived for almost 600 million years, and they were once one of the most common animals on the planet. A few hundred species are still around today, but not in warm water. These younger guys prefer cool polar temperatures. The seashells have company. In amongst them are stones with collections of what looks like lots of tubes. These are fossils of a coral, one that lived happily in colonies. It's called Lithostrosian. There are fossils of other ancient creatures here too, but their names are even more complicated and longer than the coral, so we'll draw a line there. Just what is it that this rich collection of wildlife is telling us? It's that 335 million years ago, we wouldn't have been standing in a Sitka spruce clearing at all, but swimming in a tropical sea that was situated not 55 degrees, but just 5 degrees north of the equator. It was one of many reefs in the middle of a warm sea, and for these animals to thrive as well as they did, it was a sea that was as clean as it was clear. Stone 6. Hot, swampy and dangerous. I think this might be the noisiest place I take you. We're on the town moor at Hoppin's time. You won't see many rocks on the town moor, so I appreciate I'm pushing my brief here, but bear with me, the rocks are close. Let's just move away from the fun of the fair for a bit. We'll walk across to the sedate bit near Gosforth and then over to Cow Hill. Ever wondered about all those humps and bumps on the moor? It's not the Hoppins, nor the cows that are to blame. You can blame rocks, and one in particular, the rock that made the town rich and famous, coal. Very close to the surface here is a coal seam called the High Main. It was rarely less than 1.5 metres thick and often exceeded 2 metres. There is evidence that our ancestors were mining this coal in the 14th century, or even earlier. First, they worked it from bell pits, multiple short vertical shafts, which they opened up underground. They're called bell pits because that's the shape of the cavity they leave. But bell pits weren't so efficient, and as demand grew for coal, the men and the boys went deeper and drove tunnels and corridors in a grid pattern, leaving pillars of coal to support the roof. Move forward to World War II, and the need for coal became urgent. So they quarried the coal, open cast mining. The uneven surface of the moor tells the story of mining, and then, because the coal workings collapse and sink, subsidence. Sadly, it's one of the few indications today of this city's long and prosperous association with coal. Don't you think the city fathers should rectify this and get a developer to leave a memorial seam of coal on display in the basement of one of their new buildings? A bit like Jorvik. The hot, dangerous and swampy bit? Well, 300 million years ago, coal wasn't a rock. It was still trees and plants and rotting vegetation in a subtropical coastal swampy forest filled with 4.5 metre carnivorous amphibians. A lot more frightening than even the worst of the ride at the Hoppins. Stone 7. An intruder. If there was a stone which illustrated how our rocky bones shape the Northumberland landscape, then it's stone number 7. There is nowhere else in Britain where it is more obvious how rocks influence the way our land looks. Where are we? On the windsill at Peel Crags. You wouldn't have to have a degree in civil engineering or military planning to know that if you wanted a good place to build a frontier, the edge of your empire, this was it. Take nothing away from Hadrian and his engineers. They came here in AD 122 and not only planned it, but within 10 years had it built too. Probably with a lot less fuss than HS2, and at least this bit of empire infrastructure was actually in the north. We are standing on the top of a cliff 30 metres high. Quarrymen called this long east-west ridge of hard rock the wind sill. Wind because it's very hard, and a sill is a layer of flat-lying rock. It's one of the most iconic pieces of bedrock in Northumberland, arguably in the north of England, and, just so you know, it's famous amongst geologists the world over. This is the sill that gave its name to all other similar rocks across the planet. Let's get the science bit out of the way. The rock is a dolerite, and it was injected as 1200-degree molten magma into local sandstones, limestones and shales 295 million years ago. It's an igneous intrusion, so a bit like putting jam in a Victoria sponge as an afterthought. Then that magma, the jam, cooled, contracted and solidified, forming those obvious vertical cracks and fissures. Millions of years of erosion since has left this hard man of all hard Northumbrian rocks standing proud. Of course, as all Northumbrians know, this isn't the only bit of windsill in the county. It stretches in a great arc across the county to the coast and down to the North Pennines. Just a short endnote for historians and all those connected with Northumbria tourism. It's worth bearing in mind that without this bit of stone, not only would the Romans probably have built their frontier somewhere else, but those barons and saints would have had nowhere to put their castles and their monasteries either. Where would the tourists go then? Stone 8. Deserts, salty seas, and a red-hot visitor from the Isle of Mull. Fancy an ice cream and fish and chips with your rocks? Destination Tynemouth Castle and Priory, and the youngest rocks in the old county. Yes, you've noticed. To make sure I got a couple of not-to-be-missed stones in, I've adopted the Northumberland of old, including Newcastle and North Tyneside. There's a fundamental and pretty obvious geological rule. The oldest stones are at the bottom. With a couple of notable exceptions, like when earthquakes shake things up and hot rocks intrude, that rule holds good. So let's start at the bottom with the oldest. We are standing on the North Pier, looking down and north across the foreshore at some washed-out looking weathered sandstone. Those are Carboniferous rocks and 310 million years old. Those same rocks continue in the cliff, and above them, and home to lots of nesting fulmars, is a yellow sandstone. And on top of that, a buff rock, like a limestone, but it's got magnesium as well as calcium in it. What's the story? Well, after the coal swamps and sandy deltas of the Carboniferous came the Permian period. Initially, it was a time of hot, rocky deserts, which bleached the rocks, and then it became a place of migrating sand dunes, and they became the yellow sandstone. Then around 260 million years ago or so, a very salty sea, a bit like the Persian Gulf, invaded the land and deposited the magnesium and calcium-rich rock that the castle and the priory sit on. Before we head for the chip shop, stand on the steps where the North Pier meets the cliff and look down and out to sea. Just below the pier, do you see a 3-metre band of darker grey rock heading east, parallel to the pier? This is the Tynemouth Dyke, a once molten rock called a dolerite. A mere 60 million years old, it's one of the youngest bits of rock in Northumberland. It's a red-hot visitor from the Isle of Mull. One of a whole load of molten blades of rock that sliced across northern Britain. Right, time for the fish and chips and maybe an ice cream too. After all, we may have only walked a few hundred yards, but we've travelled across 250 million years. Stone 9. Do you want ice with that? You can maybe tell we've come a long way inland to see this particular stone. Near Fallowfield, north of Hexham, is a field with a very thin soil, so thin that flat sandstone bedrock slabs poke through. In a dry summer like now, you can pick out the joints in the rock because the soil is so thin, they are the only green bits in a grass field. We are here to see a very special bit of that sandstone. Special because it's damaged. Badly scratched, in fact. Wouldn't do for the Antiques Roadshow or the British Museum director, would it? But us geologists aren't like fine art specialists. We appreciate a bit of wear and tear. It helps us understand what these stones have experienced. So what's the story here? Well, believe it or not, we are currently in an ice age. and we have been for the last 2.6 million years. We just happen to be in a warm period, an interglacial. The ice will return. What was it like? Less than 20,000 years ago, average global temperature was 6 degrees lower than it is today. So it was cold here, very much below zero, and an ice sheet that reached a kilometre in thickness covered the whole of north of England. Don't think Alps, those are valley glaciers. Think more the white wastes of Greenland. This ice was moving quite quickly from Scotland and Cumbria eastwards across Northumberland, and as it did so, it scraped, bulldozed and carried billions of tons of rock, clay and sand with it. Stones and pebbles at the base of that moving ice gouged grooves into the bedrock beneath, so even the most expert French polisher won't be able to get rid of these scratch marks. Just as well, not only do the scratches tell us that ice passed this way, they tell us its general direction of movement too, from west to east. So here is evidence that even in relatively recent geological times, the climate has changed. And of course, climate change is a headline topic today. Does global warming mean we can avoid the return of the next ice sheet? Afraid not. But the human race's interference with natural systems might put it off for 50,000 years. But of course, long before then, like now, we will still have to deal with and adapt to excessive heat and rainfall and the enormous challenges that will bring. Stone 10. Latecomers to the landscape. You've made it to the last set of stones. Time goes quickly when you're having fun, doesn't it? I could carry on and tell you more stories about another 10 fantastic Northumberland stones, but I think I'd be pushing my luck. We're just outside the village of Duddow, in the north of the county, walking up a hedgerow to a hill. On the top I can see 5 standing stones, and when we get there the views are special. What a panorama, especially across to the Cheviot Hills. Stone circles like this were erected by Neolithic or Bronze Age people around 4,000 years ago. Here at Duddow, the stones in the circle are made of sandstone. They are well weathered, in part because they've been around a long time before our ancestors used them. It's Carboniferous sandstone and over 330 million years old. Early archaeologists said that they found charcoal and pieces of bone in a pit in the middle of the Duddow stones. So this might have been from a human burial. Archaeologists and historians say they don't fully understand exactly what these stone circles were for. But they must have been important ritual sites. Maybe they were for the burial of the dead, or perhaps for calculating the seasons and astronomical events. Or perhaps they were a place that people would gather. Or maybe for all of these reasons. One weird thing about geologists is that they take a long view of our planet. They think in millions of years. Weird maybe, but it's a handy perspective to have, especially when humankind gets a bit uppity about its own importance. Millions of years are hard to get your head round, but this may help. If the age of the Earth, that's 4.6 billion years, is represented as a clock face, we have to wait until the clock is about to strike midnight. That's about 200,000 years ago, before Homo sapiens appears. So when you look at the landscape of Northumberland, or indeed any landscape, anywhere, it's worth remembering that we humans are just latecomers.